Hey guys! After 3 years of running an Etsy shop, I'd figured I'd go through the process of how I list products on Etsy. To get started, on the Etsy homepage, we will need to go to the shop dashboard, then click listings, and then add products. The layout has actually recently changed, but the process remains practically the same, and the first thing we need to do is select how the item was made. For me, I'm listing a 3D printed game that I print when a customer purchases the product, so I click I made it, and it's a finished product made to order. For the title, I always have the main name of the product first, then use a hyphen to add multiple supporting details of the game. For this game, I'll be doing Flickade 8 player as the main title, and then I'll have the supporting details be tabletop game, family fun, flicking ships. This just serves to help people both find it easier and understand what the product is before really even clicking on the listing. Moving on to the photos. This is definitely the most important part of the listing. For this particular listing, I actually have most of the images already done from the Kickstarter project, but I did have to do a few extra, and that I will be showing the editing process. But in general, for the images, I try to use natural lighting in most of the images, sometimes do it outside, and then sometimes do it inside. Though, if you do have a studio or a professional setup, that would work great as well. I always try and take a variety of images so that I can just choose my favorites when editing them in Photoshop. Really, all I do in Photoshop is increase the brightness and contrast, and sometimes I don't even do that, and I only really do that if needed. And then I'll occasionally add text and size details. I try avoid doing the text in the thumbnails, but really it depends on what it is. I find that switchblades are really the most difficult, as I often need to combine multiple images into the listing to show the products offered, as when I try taking multiple photos of them all in one, it just doesn't really work. Overall, my favorite thumbnails are the ones without many tweaks, like the wildlife wobble, articulated lizard, and grass block switchblades, which for this one does have text, but I've personally felt that it helped the listing. As for the camera I've been using, I've mainly just been using an iPhone XS, but I did actually borrow an iPhone 15 Pro for doing this listing on some of the extra images. The first ones were still done with the XS though. As for the dimensions of the images, annoyingly, Etsy actually recently changed this. Originally, it was more of the dimensions of a phone. I think it was 4 by 3 if I recall. But now they changed it to be a square, at least for the thumbnails. And ironically, not even all of them are changed yet, but I'm pretty sure that's what they're going for to, especially when I was looking it up online. So if you're doing one now, I'd suggest doing it as a square format. That way, if you do have text, and everything will actually show up on the image. Some of my older images don't actually look as good in the thumbnails because I had text and now it was cut off. I probably need to go update it, but I'm not entirely sure if I have the file, so it will be a little bit more complicated. But yeah, just something that changed recently that just happens every once in a while. Another thing that Etsy has recently allowed is you can now add video. Granted, it doesn't have sound, and it's only a very short video, about 15 seconds, and I have actually found that it is actually pretty useful. I'd recommend either just panning across your product or showing something it does. For like Wildlife Wobble, for instance, I just had it collapsing, showing that it was actually done, and then I thought it was kind of cool collapsing it. For this particular listing, I'll just be editing down the trailer that I created for Flickade originally for the Kickstarter, as I think it did a pretty good job actually showing what the game is. So yeah, when creating the listing, adding the photos and videos are definitely the most time consuming part if you do it right. Though it's definitely worth doing that, as it would dramatically help your listing if it is done right, as people will actually click on it and then be more willing to purchase it if the photos look more professional. If you want, you can also wait and do the photos and videos after you've already done the rest, then you can just hit saved as draft, which I've definitely done a couple times if I don't have the photos done at that moment. Moving on to the description. Here I really recommend just talking about your product and having the most important details, which I found to be size and anything that actually comes with it. Honestly though, many people actually don't read it, so it's not necessarily just for them, but to add keywords to help in search optimization. So either way, it doesn't do nothing. I also definitely recommend using ChatGPT to help it make it sound better and improve spelling and help with keywords, that sort of thing. For this listing, I actually have a lot of it written because of the Kickstarter, so I'm going to be copying, pasting sections of that, and then basically just editing out parts that I don't think work for this particular Etsy listing. Because the Kickstarter was for Flickade in general, and some of it's a little bit too long, so I don't feel like it's entirely needed. Next, I typically move to tags, category, and materials, and then come back to the price if I have variations. For the tags, I just try and come up with anything that I can think people will search for. Again, you can use ChatGPT to help with this, though it's honestly not great all the times for doing tags. Material is pretty self-explanatory for me, as it's just PLA. For shipping, I definitely recommend packaging a product as if you sold it, or at least putting everything in the box and then weigh it so that you can get accurate ship cost estimates, especially if you're doing free shipping. I've also found that depending on the product will depend on whether I'm offer free shipping. Typically, the really cheap products I charge for shipping, and the more expensive ones are free shipping. That's just how I do it, but there's definitely different ways of doing it, and different people have different opinions on that. One thing about offering free shipping is that oftentimes you have to increase the price gradually, as the shipping prices do increase every once in a while. So going back to variations, Etsy actually only allows you to have two different categories. So if you want to have like a color and a different expansion amount, then that's really all you can do. Which is kind of a pain because originally I was going to have all of Flickade in one listing until I realized how much of a pain because I would need the colors, different styles, and then I need a third one for the final details. But yeah, that doesn't really quite work. So if you do want that, then you typically have to create a separate listing. But for this one, because I did split it up into the 8-player and then the 4-player on the another one and 2-player, that's totally fine. So for this one, I'll just be adding the standard base game for 8 players, and then I'll be adding the expansion ships. The expansion ships actually come with a different size container, so that is why it is also a little bit more expensive, an extra $10. The main reason I am listing this one as quite high, and actually my most expensive listing, is because of how long all the pieces take to print. Granted, I'm not entirely sure how many I will sell, so if you do want to sell more, definitely charge a cheaper amount. Most of my successful listings have been within the $10 to $15 range, or with Wildlife Wobble, it's actually $25, but I guess it's a game, so I guess that one makes sense. So yeah, once you've gone through all these steps, you can actually just hit publish. Once you publish it, you can go back and edit your listing later on, but I only really do that if I have a new image because a reviewer said that I should add something and then I add something later on to the listing, or if I had some grammar error and some spellings sort of thing, which I've definitely had that happen before. Overall, I try to get the entire listing done before I actually publish it. Otherwise, I save it as a draft. But for this one, now that it's done, I'll hit publish. Also, if you don't have a video, that's also where I come back and add it later, just because sometimes you don't have one and they take a little bit longer to do. And one other thing that I've noticed with Etsy listings is typically I don't get a sale on my listings until 3 months down the line. Definitely some exceptions, but yeah, in general, don't expect to sell right away, especially if this is your first listing. Leave it there for like around 4 months or even more, because if it's seasonal, then it may get sales more around Christmas time or some other season. So yeah, that is how you list products on Etsy. It's really not that complicated, and I hope this helped guide through the process. I remember when I did it the first time, and it was kind of weird doing it, so figured I'd make this video. Aside from that, I'll have a link in the description so that you can see this listing that I was doing while making this video, if you want to see something that I did with it. Also, I'll have a link to the Etsy shop in general if you want to check out some of my other listings. But aside from that, I'll hopefully see you in the next video, and bye!